The 2024 NFL season has come to an end. Some teams surprised while others disappointed. Let's go in draft order and grade every team based on their preseason expectations. With a struggling Will Levis and an overall ailing roster, expectations for the Titans were not very high, but they still failed to reach them. Nobody foresaw the insane meme run that Will Levis would have, and overall they just did not show any fight against good teams aside from one game in Houston. I would say F, but the number 1 pick might make it all worth it in the end. I'll give Tennessee a D. Good luck, Cam Ward or Shedeur. What a horrible season for Cleveland. After an 11-6 playoff run under Joe Flacco, we thought that the Browns would continue to at least be decent. Maybe they would miss the playoffs, but at worst they would have 7 or 8 wins. But oh, were we wrong. And now everything is collapsing in on the Browns as they look like they're on the verge of returning to be the joke of the NFL. And with 2 more years of Watson's fully guaranteed contract, Kevin Stefanski's seat is now flaming hot. It feels like even if they traded for Patrick Mahomes and Justin Jefferson this offseason, they wouldn't be competitive in 2025. The Browns definitely get an F.
The horror!
Well, the expectations were low for you, New York, but this was something else. The offense was terrible and became generationally bad when they cut Daniel Jones. The defense was a clear downgrade over last season without Wink Martindale, and their fans had to watch Saquon Barkley, Xavier McKinney, Bo Nix, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, and other players that they could have had this offseason have great seasons, while they were stuck with Tommy DeVito and Drew Lock averaging 10 points a game by the end of the year. The icing on the cake was the win against the Colts to blow the number 1 pick and possibly knock them out of QB contention once again. The Giants get an F.
The horror!
The Patriots sort of stayed the course this year. You would have liked to have seen better results in the win column if you're a Patriots fan, and it would have been nice if things worked out for Jerod Mayo, but they got through the season and achieved what was really their main goal: develop Drake May and don't get him killed. May had some really solid games and showed flashes, but the real test for him will be next season. And with Vrabel in charge, things look hopeful for New England, but 2024 was still a rough year. D+. Another absolute disaster. The Jaguars should be hitting their stride right now. They should be in the same conversation as the Chiefs, Bills, and Bengals as a perennial top team with a great quarterback, but they're just not. It's not even like they started going downhill when Trevor Lawrence got hurt. They were bad with him and bad without him. And now Doug Peterson is gone. Where on earth do you go from here? I'm glad I don't own the Jaguars right now. Another F.
The horror!
Raiders fans must have been cautiously optimistic entering this season. Antonio Pierce looked good as an interim coach, but the quarterback position was still a major question mark, and that question mark proved too big to contain. A couple late-season wins knocked them out of contention for Shedeur Sanders, and now this team is just floating around in mediocrity with big problems to solve this offseason. They need improvement at every level of the field. D. How did the Jets manage to pull this off? This might have been the best QB play they've seen in 60 years, and they still found a way to finish 5-12 and worse than last season with Zach Wilson. As soon as they get the quarterback right and he stays healthy, the defense decides to regress into oblivion, the coach is fired in week 5, and the team only wins 3 games the rest of the season. Now what do? Look for Aaron Rodgers' replacement? Draft a skill player and run it back? Whatever they decide, it probably won't work. The Jets get an F.
The horror!
Finally, a team I can grade positively. After the first few weeks, we all thought this season was a wash for Carolina, and it would just be a customary final run for Bryce Young, as we collectively watched him struggle with pity. But somehow, after being benched, Bryce came back and started tearing things up, quite frankly. The Chiefs game, the Arizona game, and the Atlanta game had some incredible play from Bryce, which redeemed the season and sparked hope into the entire franchise. Out of all the teams with a losing record this year, I think the Panthers may be the most content. I'll give them a B. Another rough year for the Saints. They really should be pouncing on the weak NFC South with how much talent they have on their roster, but it just isn't working. And it's made much more disappointing by the red-hot 2-0 start they had. Maybe if they stayed healthier, things could have been different, but I think they need to go back to the drawing board this offseason. They didn't beat a single team with a winning record. New Orleans gets a D. Entering this season, I think it was reasonable to assume that as long as Caleb Williams had a decent year, the Bears would have a shot at the playoffs. And that looked like it was going to hold true as they started 4-2 despite up and down QB play. But 10 straight losses and a Thanksgiving timeout fiasco later, Chicago is in shambles. Hopefully Ben Johnson can build around Caleb, because he did show some flashes this year, especially in moments like the London game and at home versus the Vikings. His fatal flaw from college still needs to be put under control though, as he just holds the ball way too long. I'd say the Bears get a D+. Talk about disappointing. With the talent on this roster and coaching staff, the 49ers should be winning 11 games every single year at the bare minimum. You can blame it on the injuries to Brandon Ayuk and Christian McCaffrey, but they should be in the playoffs even without these guys. Even when Ayuk was in, he struggled, and the same goes for McCaffrey. Maybe it's just a blip on the radar, but 49ers fans should be hoping that this isn't the beginning of the end of their dominant run over the past few years. San Francisco gets an F.
The horror.
The Cowboys season was also pretty disappointing. After Dak Prescott had a near MVP caliber 2023, it was rough to watch him struggle in the 8 games he played this year. I think Dallas has a more valid excuse with the injury to their quarterback, but they're still going to need a lot of work to get back to contention for the division, especially now with the presence of Jaden Daniels. And they need to do a better job of fighting against the top teams. Just look at the obliteration the Eagles delivered them in both games. It's time for a mini rebuild. Dallas gets a D+. The hopes were certainly higher than 8-9 for the Dolphins, but they definitely did well to even find themselves in contention for the playoffs in Week 18. They really could have used a better backup quarterback. If Mike White was still on the team, maybe that would have made the difference against the Colts and got them into the playoffs. But the team still has bigger problems. Tyreek Hill was coming off the back of his best season ever, and in 2024 he couldn't even put up 1,000 yards. And now the trade rumors are running rampant. While 8-9 isn't terrible, the Dolphins have fallen a long way from Tua being the MVP favorite in the middle of 2023. Miami gets a C. There was a lot of optimism for the Colts entering this season. Anthony Richardson still has a lot of developing to do. The defense is very questionable, and their AFC South schedule may have inflated their 2023 record. Still, the way the season ended against the Giants was incredibly disappointing, and Anthony Richardson moving on and off the bench all year for injury or performance reasons is extremely concerning. Next year looks like it's make or break for this Indianapolis coaching staff and their quarterback. C-. I think we all expected the Falcons to at least win the NFC South this year, right? I mean, they finished 7-10 in 2023 with Arthur Smith, Desmond Ridder, and Taylor Heineke. On paper, adding Kirk Cousins and a new coaching staff should have sent this team up to at least 10 or 11 wins with all the talent they have, especially at the skill positions on offense. But unfortunately for Atlanta, this all backfired as Kirk Cousins led the NFL in interceptions. At least now they look smart for picking Michael Penix Jr., plus they have Kirk as a good trade asset because he still had some good moments this year, especially in the games against Tampa. While it was an underwhelming year, I think the future could still be bright for Atlanta. I'll give them a C. I expected the Cardinals to improve a decent amount this year. It looks like they're on the right track and developing slowly from the horrible situation that they had last year. Still, I can't help but think about the missed opportunities for Arizona this year, plus the fact that Marvin Harrison Jr. has been a little bit underwhelming. The team showed some crazy flashes, blowing out the Rams, Bears, Jets, and 49ers, but just needed a little bit more in the Vikings, Seahawks, and Panthers games. If Kyler can put together a season which is just a bit more consistent, the Cardinals could be a real threat in the NFC. I expect big things next season. Their 2024 gets a B-. When will the Bengals learn to play good football in September? Losing to the Patriots, Chiefs, Commanders, and Ravens early in the year really wrecked their season. But looking back, their schedule was pretty tough, and a lot of these losses made sense. It was heartbreaking with how many close games this team lost, and their defense really let down their offense, which had an unbelievable season. Joe Burrow could have and perhaps should have won MVP with the year he had, and Jamar Chase was the best receiver in the league, so to come up short of even making the playoffs feels like a catastrophe, especially in a season where the Super Bowl could have been in play. I'll give the Bengals a C+. Just feels like another run-of-the-mill year for the Seahawks under Geno Smith. This was kind of a down season for their quarterback, which actually could be a positive if it means he could pick it up a bit in 2025. That said, the team feels very stagnant and perhaps big changes are due, especially if they want to continue competing in the tough NFC West. The Seahawks get a B-. I think we've learned our lesson about writing off Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers now. All it took was Baker finishing second in touchdown passes. Tampa Bay definitely outperformed expectations, but really it wasn't surprising when you recall their 2023 season. The question now moves to if this roster can be built up quick enough before age begins to catch up with guys like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. You've done good to become a consistent playoff team, Tampa. Now it's time to take the final step and make a deep playoff run. Don't become the Texans of the NFC. Tampa Bay gets a B+. I don't think anyone expected the Broncos to have this good of a season. This team was a literal joke in July. Bo Nix, Jarrett Stidham, and Zach Wilson in your QB room, and it worked? It was actually better than 2023? How? Bo Nix had a great rookie season, and Denver returned to the playoffs for the first time in a decade. complete with one of the better defenses in the league. The future might actually be bright for the Broncos. They get an A-. The Steelers were all over the place from the very start of the year. It started with the drama surrounding Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, only for the coaching staff to be vindicated as Russ leads them to 10-3, then to 5 straight losses rounding out the year when Mike Tomlin realized he reached his winning record quota. I think Steelers fans have to feel frustrated right now because when Russ was at his best, the team looked like a real championship contender. But it all fell apart and resulted in disappointment, and now the future looks uncertain. Pittsburgh gets a B-. The Chargers returned to where they should be this season thanks to much better coaching. While on paper this was a big jump from 5-12 to 11-6, I'd say they should have been a lot better in 2023, and this year was just riding the ship. But now they've got much harder problems to tackle, including their weak receiving core and random games where the defense struggled towards the end of the year. Fix these things and teach Justin Herbert how to win playoff games, and LA is on the right track. B+. Green Bay got their regular season improvement that they were looking for. The offense looks a lot more consistent under Jordan Love, and now it looks like the team can have some staying power and playoff contention. If they want to break into that next tier of teams, though, they either need Love to play better more consistently, or they need to start hitting home runs in the draft. They were somewhat unlucky, though, playing in the toughest division in the NFL, and being swept by the Vikings and Lions left them to die with the 7th seed in the playoffs. Still, you've got to beat your division rivals if you want to make it far. The Packers get a B+ for 2024, and hope for more in 2025. The Vikings are the Jets of the playoffs. Ouch! The oldest American sports franchise without a championship. And we should have seen this coming, right? The Vikings weren't just going to sail into the sunset after a happy season. That just doesn't happen for them. Despite the heartbreaking wildcard loss, which came after having the best record of any wildcard team ever, the Vikings have many things to celebrate after 2024. Their coach clearly has an incredible ability to mold and help quarterbacks, and there's plenty of optimism for J.J. McCarthy for that reason. To have a season where Sam Darnold is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL was great, but the ending definitely soured it. Minnesota gets a B+. The Texans made it back to the divisional round, but this season still felt disappointing. C.J. Stroud had a bit of a sophomore slump, and they only made it back to the playoffs in part thanks to their weak division. Their preseason hopes were higher than getting blown out 31-2 by the Ravens. They need to take that final step if they want to make a championship run. They did turn it up in the playoffs, so I'll give them a B+. The Rams feel like they just won't die. How are they still competing in the playoffs after that Super Bowl hangover in 2022? And the pass rush this year was just monstrous. This roster is very well built. You just wonder when Stafford's age is going to catch up with him, though. I don't think anyone had LA picked for the divisional round, so I'll give them an A-. It's too bad their mistakes killed them in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, I think this is what we've all come to expect out of Baltimore. Dominant regular season, complete with a Lamar MVP campaign, followed up by heartbreak in the playoffs. Can we even pretend to be surprised at this outcome? On the bright side though, Lamar has firmly placed himself in that Mahomes-Allen-Burrow category, and it feels like as long as he's playing like that, they'll consistently be in the playoffs and have a chance, and there won't be any more 8-9 seasons like 2021. Maybe next year is their year. Genuinely. B+. Tragedy for everyone involved. We were rooting for you, Detroit. Nobody wants to see you down and out forever. But it just didn't work out, man. We can take remorse in the fact that it was the greatest regular season of all time for the Lions. And Jahmyr Gibbs looks like the best player out there on the field. But the Lions have reached that point where it's no longer about just making the playoffs. This team's championship window is open, and it might close faster than you think given that they don't have a top quarterback. A phenomenal season soured by its ending. Sounds like every team that lost in this round, besides the Rams. A-. What a tremendous season for Washington. Almost no one had them picked for the playoffs, let alone the NFC Championship game. It was all off the back of an incredible year from Jaden Daniels, who instantly thrust himself into the top 10 QB conversation, and looks like he has future MVP potential. They got this far with an average defense and a rookie quarterback. There's plenty of hope for their future. If Daniels keeps it up and they make the right additions in the coming years, they'll be a perennial contender. A+. This is about what we expected from Buffalo. Just like the Ravens, they have a great regular season almost every year but can't make the Super Bowl. I can't be too harsh though, they got all the way to the championship game and were only taken out by the unstoppable dynasty. And plus, let's not forget about the preseason concerns over the receiving core. They adjusted well with James Cook throughout the year. Keon Coleman did disappoint though, and passing on Ladd McConkey looks pretty egregious in hindsight. I debated this one heavily, but I'll give the Bills an A-. It felt like this game was coming all year for the Chiefs. You can't just keep winning one-score games and expect to beat everyone. But they're typically so good in the playoffs that, in hindsight, we ignored all of the warning signs. The blocked kick against the Broncos, the out-of-bounds toe against the Ravens, the fourth down in the playoffs against the Bills, this team was worse than their record showed. They have a washed-up receiving core, a mediocre offensive line, and the defense is starting to age. That said, of course it was still the Chiefs, and they still made the Super Bowl. I can't give anything except an A. Congratulations, Philadelphia. You built the best roster in the NFL. You made the best free agent signing of the offseason. You continue to draft well every year. And most importantly, you bounced back after the collapse in 2023. An extreme case of Murphy's Law for Giants fans. Who knows how much longer it'll last for the Eagles, but for now, you are the champions. Enjoy it. A+. So those are my grades. Let's try not to start a war in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone.